Now let's go back to the scene where the action is. We are looking forward to see the North Korean leader taking off from his quarters to the venue for the summit. Not the summit exactly, the casual dinner and a meet and greet. We will be showing you footages from the scene right now. Here is the hotel where North Korean leader Kim Jong-un should be taking off. We do not see the stern bodyguard that was directly staring at the camera just now, Jung-hee.
We are just seeing some of the vehicles. Well, according to the schedule, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump were to arrive at Sofitel Legend Metropole at 6:15, which is only 2 minutes away from now, but it seems Kim is still not leaving from his hotel. And we heard that U.S. President Donald Trump is already on his way to the Metropole Hotel. So for Trump, from a JW Marriott Hotel where U.S. President Donald Trump is staying, okay, we're seeing some police cars coming along with some motorcycles.
This could be the motorcade to escort the North Korean leader to the venue.
Yes.
That's a huge turnout.
That is
Regular citizens and reporters alike.
Everywhere that North Korean leader was heading to, for example, the North Korean embassy in Hanoi, we could see a lot of Vietnamese citizens gathering up just to catch at least, one scene of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un walking, getting out of the car, waving at people. It seems like they have high expectations for the summit as well as very high attention on the North Korean leader himself.
Well, in Singapore, he was quite a celebrity, just taking casual strolls and even selfies with regular citizens there.
It was an unexpected, stop. It was an unexpected visit that he would make to the Marina Bay Sands with some of the top Singaporean officials, and taking selfies, looking at the nightscape of Singapore, directly looking into the economic development that Singapore was able to achieve as a hub nation in Southeast Asia.
Well, it was a rainy day when he arrived, and it seems
it's President Trump.
Trump has arrived at the Metropole.
Yes,
shortly.
Some vehicles with American flags are making their way to a certain spot, and we think it'll be President Trump arriving at Sofitel Legend Metropole for his one-on-one conversation with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, as well as the social dinner.
And dinner with a very sophisticated menu that's supposed to be kept extra simple, according to the leaders of both sides. The car, I believe, is something unique on the American side. It's got a nickname called the Beast, I believe, according to some reports. It's certainly getting a lot of attention, and I'm sure a lot of car companies lobby to make sure they have the chance to be a part of the summit, as for the North Korean leader as well.
Yeah, last year even North Korean newspapers reported that President Trump showed off his car to Kim Jong-un.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, the young leader Kim Jong-un is interested in a lot of the latest snazzy products that's being produced from outside of North Korea, looking to keep up with the rest of the world someday soon. Of course, that would mean they will have to open up a little bit to the rest of the world and start an economic reform. And here is the North Korean leader's motorcade arriving.
No, those are vehicles with the American flag, so I think that's still the picture of the American delegation arriving at the Metropole. We're still
It's
not
such
sure.
a short distance between the event venue and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's quarters, but it's taking extra longer for him to be
Leave
seen.
his hotel.
Right.
But it only takes like 5 minutes for Kim to arrive at the dinner venue, so could be leaving quite soon.
For both of these enigmatic leaders, Dr. Hu, they do tend to make power statements in some unusual ways. It could be part of that to be casually late for this event as well.
So it was especially the case, and so last year at G20, when President Trump was waiting for President Moon Jae-in, many newspapers reported that it was very rare case for President Trump to wait for someone. So so making someone to wait for him is another way of showing his power or his status. But from the last year that they follow that choreographed move by each side. So I think that they are trying to be on time this time.
Okay, they're trying, but it's not working out for some reason.
Well, what I saw, what I read about was that for the case of the Singapore summit, I heard that we're able to learn who is a guest and who is serving the guest by where the leaders are standing. So, for example, at the Singapore summit, it was North Korean leader Kim Jong-un standing on the left, and then U.S. President Donald Trump standing on the right.
And we would like to apologize to our viewers for the quality of the footage we have at this point. That this is what we have at this point. We will try to provide you some extra detailed descriptions of what's going on as the hour progresses.
So at the Singapore summit, I heard that it was U.S. President Donald Trump who served North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as the guest. And I'm wondering what will happen about that at the Hanoi summit today.
Judging by the way the title and the names and the flags are arranged, it could be the other way around this time.
It could be the other way around, but looking at how Kim Jong-un is being late.
Speaking of North Korean leader's special ties to Vietnam, his grandfather has a unique bond with the founder or the leader of Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh.
So, founder of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, he visited Vietnam in 1958 and 1964. So, at that time, Kim Il-sung also used train in part of his journey to Vietnam. And at the same time that while he's traveling to Vietnam, he met Mao Zedong twice. So there was a speculation that Kim Jong-un wants to emulate his grandfather's journey to Vietnam this time. And there's also another speculation that Kim Jong-un might be meeting President Xi Jinping on his way back to Pyongyang. But the problem for that kind of scenario is that China is going to have the biggest political conference in from March 3rd and March 4th. So,
and Dr. We're seeing some interesting developments there with the bodyguards stepping out of the vehicles.
Yes, it seems like a lot of vehicles actually arrived at a certain place and people looking like North Korean guards just got out of the car. They're running around. It seems like North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is on his way to... Oh, and we're seeing North Korean and American flags lined up. It seems like they're going to stand for a photo op quite soon.
It was interesting how Donald Trump's usual signature handshake did not shake up North Korean leader Kim Jong-un the first time they met. It seemed like they stood their ground and they did not exert too much pressure to portray some kind of a power move back then, a more amicable first contact back then.
Kim Jong-un, obviously being so much younger than President Trump, he still didn't want to lose, and he still, was on his ground. He kept his pride as a leader of a regime.
And hopefully Donald Trump is learning the ropes as he moves along to not really aggressively shake hands and do it for a prolonged period of time. This is an exciting moment for the people of Vietnam, as well as, of course, those of us watching from Korea and the United States as well. There are growing expectations as to what could come out of this summit. Partly, Professor Wu, because the first one was a rather disappointment, and I understand you got into a bit of a trouble by calling it not such a successful one after the summit ended.
So last year, many observers expected that there's going to be a big deal, which means that North Korea is going to fully denuclearize, and the U.S. and the international community is going to provide the lifting of those sanctions and some economic aid to North Korea. So that kind of a one-shot deal is going to make a huge difference in the Korean Peninsula and the region. However, it ended up with some kind of abstract agreement between two leaders on the bilateral relations and the perpetual peace on the Korean Peninsula, and the denuclearization and the repatriation of the remains of the U.S. soldiers. So one of the expectation from there was that two countries are going to have a working level negotiation from July, but we have to wait it for like 8 months until we saw this kind of working level negotiations with the summit in February this year. So last year's summit was meaningful in that it actually decreased the tensions on the Korean Peninsula, and North Korea, as President Trump reiterated that North Korea has not tested any nuclear or missile tests since then. So it's just still meaningful, but whether it has been there's any kind of like expedition for the denuclearization of North Korea, we have some doubt. So that is why we have a bigger hope this time that they are going to produce some kind of meaningful result with regard to the denuclearization of North Korea.
So yeah, that remains to be seen if that's going to be touched upon between the leaders at their one-on-one brief conversation, as well as the social dinner they're going to have for an hour and a half. So right now on screen, we're seeing some American and North Korean flags lined up for a possible photo op of the leaders of Pyongyang and Washington. So according to the schedule that we have, well, it's right now it's 6:24.
It's a 10-minute delay.
Right. Things are getting behind the schedule. But they were supposed to arrive at the Sofitel Legend Hotel 10 minutes ago.
Right.
And they were supposed to exchange greetings at 6:30 local time, which is only 5 minutes away. But we still have not seen U.S. President Donald Trump arrive at the hotel, nor North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Maybe that is happening, but we still haven't seen the footage of it coming in yet. So after they exchange greetings and maybe take a photo together, they'll be having a 20-minute long one-on-one conversation, as well as a dinner that'll go for an hour and a half.
Right. We've seen the movements, but no definite arrivals or FaceTime to the public or the journalists who are waiting for the North Korean leader and Donald Trump, the President of the United States. In terms of the leadership style of the North Korean leader, it certainly is a changeover from his predecessors, right, Dr. Wu?
So it is basically same in that they are like individual dictators in the socialist system. However, how Kim Jong-un is showing his image to the people and the world is very much different from his father and his grandfather. Especially his father has never like really showed on the international scene, and he's never like revealed his like life to the public. But this time, North Korean newspapers reported like immediately after that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un had a meeting with his staff in Vietnam, which was very rare case, because even last year that North Korean newspapers reported after Kim Jong-un has left, but the North Korean TV this time was actually gave some kind of live feed that North Korean leader is taking train to Vietnam for the second summit with the President Trump. And this morning, that North Korea's newspaper Nodong Sinmun reported that Kim Jong-un visited North Korean embassy in Hanoi, and he had debriefing from his staff about the negotiations so far. So I think his style is certainly different from his father and his grandfather.
Right. Media access is one way of gauging how different North Korea has become since opening up a little bit under the leadership of Kim Jong-un. Jong-il, during the first summit, or rather the third summit between the two leaders of the two Koreas, there was considerable exposure and willingness to open up to the outside media.
That is true. I mean, not just the summit, but there were a lot of schedules beyond the summit meeting itself. Like, for example, President Moon and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un decided to have dinner at a North Korean local restaurant, which was even open to Pyongyang citizens. So that was the moment when South Korean President Moon Jae-in was exposed to the North Korean public, but at the same time, Kim Jong-un not just staying at home, but decided to come out with the South Korean president and enjoy the dinner together. So that was one moment, and another moment was, of course, South Korean President Moon and the North Korean leader going to the Mount Baekdusan together. They, singing along, they spending time together at the top of the mountain. those kinds of moments were the scenes that we could see that North Korean leader is indeed willing to open up himself and actually increase his own exposure to the world, and portray himself as one of the normal leaders of so many countries, not just being a one-of-a-kind leader of a reclusive regime. So definitely, we saw North Korean leader move to different places. For example, yesterday he took a special train, arrived at Dongdang Station. He was greeted by the top Vietnamese officials. He went to the North Korean embassy. And a lot of Vietnamese citizens actually came out to the streets to capture the moments. So he is definitely increasing his exposure. And I believe that more of that we will be able to see, not just today and tomorrow, but also on Friday and Saturday as well, as Kim Jong-un will be, staying in Vietnam for 2 more days.
Right. And we are going to see the leaders finally making contact.
So the leaders of North Korea and the U.S. coming in to exchange greetings for a photo op, meeting for the first time since June 12, 2018.
A much softer handshake and immediate exchange of pleasantries and smiles, always a good sign.
Intimate smiles on their face.
But it seems like that Kim Jong-un's face is more tense than last year.
Right.
He has more smile than last year, but he shows some kind of tenseness.
Trump is speaking.
Have you walked back at all on denuclearization in North Korea? No. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Mr. President, is it clear end of the Korean War, sir? We'll see. We'll be seeing. Thank you. Thank you all very much. You're coming back.
So it looks like President Trump is not trying to give out much details of his one-on-one conversation and social dinner with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. We weren't able to hear the questions, but I could hear what Trump said. He said no, and he said we'll see. So definitely we could read that he was not willing to speak much about the upcoming schedules.
Which is an unusual side of Trump that we're seeing, because usually he takes to Twitter almost immediately whenever he has thoughts, and he's very candid when it comes to speaking with reporters.
So there was a report that so many staffs of President Trump had changed, while there's no change in terms of the staff for Chairman Kim. But I just saw that Chairman Kim's translator has changed compared to the last year. That it was like first a translator, the male translator last year, but now Chairman Kim has a female translator, which is very different from the last year's scene.
Right. It certainly seems like President Donald Trump has a different game face on this time. He wasn't all smiles or eagerly addressing the media and sharing his 2 cents. Certainly, we might see a different side of him this time around.
Yeah, I mean, what I could sense was that, you know how President Trump kept on saying that we're not in a rush. And he also kept on saying, we're good as long as there's no more testing. So it seems like maybe Washington is trying to keep the expectations down, or at least lower than it is now. I mean, if we look at President Trump, he looked quite tense. At the beginning, I thought that it was North Korean leader Kim Jong-un rather looking tense. We all thought so, but it turned out that President Trump is also being a little bit nervous, at least, ahead of the schedules with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. So it's a very important meeting that eyes from the whole world are, focused on. It's going a step further from the denuclearization agreement they made last year. It's to come up with some specific steps, and maybe that is why the burdens are heavy for the 2 leaders of Washington and Pyongyang.
Right. It feels like, personally, I feel that the pressure might be more on Donald Trump's side and the Trump administration, because they were a little bit surprised about how laid back it was after the first summit, and the joint declaration lacked details.
And also, the President Trump is under heavy pressure from the domestic politics, and it is reported that at the same time, today that on the 27th local time in the U.S. that Mr. Cohen is going to testify at the court today, so which might reveal a lot of things about President Trump. And it is also reported that Mueller investigation is going to send a report to the Department of Justice, and House members, Democratic House members made a request that Department of Justice to open as much as possible. So now President Trump enjoys all the media attention in positive way, but maybe next week he's going to have a lot of media attention in a negative way in Washington, D.C. I think that is why President Trump is under pressure, and he wants to achieve something out of here so he can be more like a winner next week in Washington, D.C.
Well, when you talk about Donald Trump and the accomplishment that he's made in terms of influencing the Peninsula peace process, there was always talk about the Nobel Peace Prize, and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was in the mix trying to provide support for President Trump.
So there was like this story that to be nominated for the Nobel Prize.
Sorry.
That still remain from the very from the outside. But however, we have been able to overcome all of those obstacles, and here we are today after 261 days.
기간이 때문에 생각해보면 좀 어느 때보다도 많은 그 고민과 노력
I think we had to think a lot about this, and a lot of efforts were needed.
I believe that those 261 days were the days during which a lot of painstaking efforts were necessary, and also a lot of patience were needed.
But as I see you today, and I hope that we can make fruitful achievements that many people are awaiting for, and I will strive my best.
And that gives us a hope that we will be successful this time, and I will really try to make that happen.
Thank you very much. That's really nice. Well, I wanted to say it's an honor to be with Chairman Kim. It's an honor to be together in really a country, Vietnam, where they've really rolled out the red carpet, and they're very honored to have us. And it's great to be with you. We had a very successful first summit. I felt it was very successful. And some people would like to see it go quicker. I'm satisfied, you're satisfied. We want to be happy with what we're doing. But I thought the first summit was a great success, and I think this one hopefully will be equal or greater than the first. And we made a lot of progress, and I think the biggest progress was our relationship is really a good one.
네, 대단히 감사합니다. 김정은 위원장님 다시 만나게 되어서 영광입니다. 그리고 또 오늘 같이 하게 되어서 또 매우 기쁩니다. 우리가 베트남에서 만났습니다. 베트남이 아주 우리를 굉장히 환영을 하고 레드카펫을 깐 것처럼 그렇게 환영하고 있습니다. 우리는 첫 번째 그 정상회담을 굉장히 성공적으로 마쳤습니다. 어떤 사람들은 우리의 어떤 진전이 더 빨리 갔으면 하고 그렇게 원하는 사람도 있지만 내가 보기에는 우리가 상당히 잘하고 있고 또 첫 번째 그 정상회담이 굉장히 성공적이었습니다. 이번 회담도 첫 번째 것과 같은 성공 또는 아니면 더 성공하기를 바라고 있습니다. 그리고 우리는 아마 이번에 더 많은 진전을 이룰 것 같습니다.
And as I've said many times, and I say it to the press, I say it to anybody that wants to listen, I think that your country has tremendous economic potential, unbelievable, unlimited. And I think that you will have a tremendous future with your country, a great leader. And I look forward to watching it happen and helping it to happen. And we will help it to happen.
우리 그 여러 번 제가 얘기를 했고 또 언론들한테도 제가 여러 번 했습니다만은 저는 조선이 엄청난 경제적인 잠재력을 가지고 있다라고 그렇게 생각합니다. 그리고 앞으로 큰 성공을 이룰 거로 생각합니다. 위대한 지도자 밑에서 아주 잘할 거로 생각합니다. 그리고 앞으로 그러한 성공을 저는 계속 보게 되기를 기대하고 있습니다.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate it. And we're going to go have dinner. And then we have some big meetings scheduled for tomorrow. And we'll see you, I guess, at a news conference at some point during the day. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, any reaction to Michael Cohen and his testimony?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Like you said, Professor, immediately Michael Cohen comes up from the media, members of the media. It looks like President Donald Trump could not shake off the ghost from the U.S. at home.
Yeah, so again, continuing the Nobel Prize talk, that there was a report that to be nominated as a candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize, there was a nomination done by February this year. And since there was no real signal that President Trump was nominated, that there is no way that he's going to get the prize in the fall this year. But it was revealed that actually Prime Minister Shinzo Abe sent a recommendation to the committee that he recommended President Trump for that position for last year. So Prime Minister Abe already did nominate President Trump for the economic Nobel Prize. So yeah, it was kind of story there.
So if I could just cut in, what we just saw was the two leaders of Pyongyang and Washington exchanging greetings ahead of their one-on-one conversation as well as the social dinner. I am thinking that it was Kim Jong-un who first made his message upon the press, before the press. He said, well, we couldn't hear his full message, but what we heard for sure was Kim Jong-un saying that there were a lot of thoughts and a lot of efforts. I mean, if we look at Kim Jong-un's face, he looked very rigid, as if he had so many thoughts in his mind. It seems like, you know, after Kim Jong-un arrived in Hanoi yesterday, he only went to the North Korean embassy. He just stayed at the hotel the whole day. And today, when his North Korean delegation was making trips to, you know, industrial facilities and some tourist attractions, Kim Jong-un stayed at his hotels with his top nuclear negotiators. So I'm thinking that he had a lot of work to do and a lot of thinking to do upon his meetings with the U.S. president. So Kim Jong-un is saying that he had to pour in a lot of efforts for this summit. And then he also expressed hope that North Korea and the U.S. could achieve fruitful results. And U.S. President Donald Trump was to speak after Kim Jong-un. He said it was an honor, and he also mentioned that he hopes that this second summit leads to some results that are at least equal to or greater than the results of the first summit. And he also mentioned once again, after making the tweet this morning, that North Korea has a great economic potential, saying that it's a great economic powerhouse. And when he was, you know, saying this part, Kim Jong-un actually broke into a smile. Like, he was staying very rigid, he was staying very tense. But once Trump spoke about North Korea's economic potential, Kim started smiling, and Trump promised that the United States will help North Korea become a great economic power. So again, we could see U.S. President Donald Trump promising North Korea a bright economic future. And what we could also see was that a news conference is going to happen tomorrow. We are still not sure if this is going to involve U.S. President Donald Trump only, or if this is going to involve North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as well. We were able to see President Moon and North Korea's Chairman Kim stand together at a news conference at the summit in September last year. We're not sure if that's going to happen tomorrow, but we know for sure that there is going to be a news conference tomorrow after their summit.
And there are multiple rounds of talks lined up, and we've seen it as a natural procedure from here on, from the past, when President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un took a little stroll, then got off mic and share a little conversation. And then North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump also took a bit of a stroll on the side, and we can expect something more casual happening on the side as well this time around.
That's true. Well, last time at the Singapore summit, it was only a 1-minute long stroll. It was very short, but at the same time, it was a very strong one, because it's our first time to witness a North Korean leader standing next to the U.S. president and walking together with intimate smiles. We're wondering if that will happen once again. But what we're hearing is that there is a garden with a French atmosphere at the Sofitel Legend Metropole. So maybe a short stroll could happen between the leaders of the two countries tomorrow.
All right, Chung-Hee, let's connect to one of our reporters standing by, Ji-won, who is at the scene in Hanoi. Ji-won, what do you have for us at this point? Could you give us some updates?
Well, Daniel, just to give you guys a wrap-up of the leaders' arrival at the Sofitel Legion Metropole Hanoi, President Donald Trump arrived exactly at 6:15 p.m., and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's car followed in as well right after a few minutes. Now, with the leaders' opening remarks, the two leaders are seen to have gotten into their one-on-one sit-down, which, according to the White House, will last for about 20 minutes. And at 7 p.m. local time, the leaders will be joined by two of their closest aides for a social dinner. From the north, it's going to be Kim Young-chol, vice chairman of North Korea's ruling Workers' Party Central Committee, and Lee Yong-ho, the regime's foreign minister. And from the U.S., it'll be Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Mick Mulvaney, acting White House Chief of Staff. Now, the dinner is expected to last for about an hour and a half, according to the released schedule.
All right, Joanna, thank you for those updates. We appreciate it. Now, we are going to keep giving you the live footage and the freshest updates from what's going on in Hanoi as the two leaders get ready for a sit-down for a meal and, of course, a little talk between the two sides. We are, of course, joined in the studio once again by Dr. Woo Jung-yup on my right and our Oh Jung-hee on my left. We do need to delve into details about how things have been building up to this point. We haven't reached the climax yet. That should be tomorrow when they actually hold multiple round of talks. And Dr. Woo, how would you rate the fact that they're holding several rounds of talks over a span of 2 days as compared to the first one? How does that reflect the resolve of the two leaders?
So the schedule tomorrow is very much the same as the last year, that President Trump and the Chairman Kim is going to have a one-on-one meeting first. Then they are going to have lunch together with their staffs, and they are going to have the second meeting with not only their staff for the second time. So I think the schedules are very much the same as last year. So maybe the only difference is that they are going to have this dinner tonight. And so first, when President Trump mentioned that he's going to meet Chairman Kim on 27th and 28th, which means like 2 days, we thought that their negotiation would start early in the morning today. However, what they are going to do is just have a brief greeting and a social dinner, as White House described. But I think it has some importance in terms of the negotiation tomorrow. So even though White House described that this is a brief greeting and a social dinner, they are going to discuss the subject anyway. And then, since they got all briefings from their staff about the negotiations so far, so now based on their own discussion with each other, probably they are going to give some instructions to their negotiators. So last year, that until the very early morning of the summit, that the negotiators from both sides, led by Ambassador Sung Kim and Ms. Choi, respectively, they had negotiations until the very early in the morning. So I think that after the dinner, that both leaders are going to give some instructions to their negotiators, and we probably would see that their negotiators are going to have tough job until the tomorrow morning.
From the summit, as compared to working level talks, what can and cannot the two sides accomplish? I'm sure there are certain things that the two leaders can accomplish that can perhaps is out of reach for the working level talks, and vice versa.
So the biggest difference between two sides are what kind of things that U.S. can provide to the North Korea in terms of the sanction relief. Because Mr. Biegun, special representative for the North Korean policy of the State Department, made a speech at the Stanford University before his meeting with his counterpart, that U.S. is thinking of some kind of political and diplomatic measures. Even though he did not explicitly use the term declaration to end the war, but he implied that something in that line can be provided to North Korea. And also there are a lot of things discussed about improving the bilateral relations between U.S. and North Korea. However, he did not mention or he did not give any signal that U.S. is willing to lift some kind of sanctions, or is the sanctions according to the measures taken by North Korea with regard to its denuclearization. However, what North Korea wants is not those political or diplomatic measures, because North Koreans believe that those things should have already provided by the U.S. government, because they already dismantled the Punggye nuclear testing site and Dongchangli missile engine testing site. So those two things are already exchanged. So for North Korea to go further with the denuclearization, such as dismantlement of Yongbyon, U.S. needs to provide something more, which is about lifting the sanctions or easing the sanctions. So I don't know how far that working level negotiators can find the middle ground between their differences. So I think a lot of things should be discussed by the leaders right now. So maybe the negotiators drafted some kind of agreement, but so many things probably would be blank in the paper.
Well, I want to jump in and add a little bit on to Dr. Wu's comments. Well, North Korea actually released its stance once again today, not through its official state media, nor through its 노동신문, which is the media for the domestic people, but actually through 조선신보, which is a North Korean state media based in Japan. So through that media, what North Korea said was that it was ready to take additional measures if the U.S. would take its corresponding measures. So what North Korea is asking the U.S. to take are corresponding measures such as the sanctions relief. What North Korea wants the most is the sanctions relief, and North Korea is saying that if Washington can make a big step forward, then it can also make another big step forward. And going beyond dismantling its Yongbyon nuclear facilities, or Punggye nuclear test sites, or Dongchangli missile engine test sites, it could even take bigger measures. And for example, that could include maybe providing a list of its arsenals, like testing sites, whatnot. So North Korea once again clarified that it's ready to move on if the U.S. is willing to provide the regime with some presents.
Right. North Korea is still, of course, viewed as an unpredictable villain by many in the international community. But definitely, this regime has made some significant steps. Maybe it's small from the outside looking in, but internally they've significantly made some changes, whether it's incremental or big.
Of course, because in terms of Punggye nuclear test site, that's like a symbolic venue for North Korea's nuclear testing. North Korea has conducted all of its 6 nuclear tests at Punggye. So dismantling Punggye nuclear test site was a big one for North Korea. And at the same time, speaking of Dongchangli missile engine test site, that site was used for the North Korean regime to develop the engines for its intercontinental ballistic missiles, which were considered as some direct threats from the U.S. side. So those 2 sites are some of the major symbolic weapons of mass destruction sites for North Korea. And at the same time, Yongbyon is a complex that has all the facilities, from reprocessing facilities to radio chemistry labs. It's able to produce plutonium and uranium, which are some key materials to produce nuclear weapons. Those are sites that are very significant to the North Korean regime, and the regime saying that it's ready to dismantle those sites, it's actually a big promise from the regime's point of view.
Right, and in terms of the negotiations, some experts are saying perhaps the U.S. needs to provide a little bit of a nudge and point out possible options for North Korea instead of just forcing something out of North Korea.
So the problem for the U.S. to provide certain incentives to North Korea is that the final destination of this process is the full and final verified dismantlement of all the nuclear weapons and the materials and the facilities that North Korea has. So until reaching that kind of point, that United States needs to hold some grip on North Korea, and the only grip that they can have, only leverage that they have is imposing sanctions on North Korea. So if U.S. government is rewarding North Korea with some kind of sanctions relief at this stage, that there's no more incentive for North Korea to comply with the demand by the United States and the international community. So the reward at this stage might end up having one-time deal this time, and there's no more negotiations. And it's going to be very difficult to persuade again that North Korea is developing nuclear weapons, so we have to put another sanctions. So it's going to be very difficult for U.S. to re-establish the sanction regime like 2018. So I think that's the kind of a dilemma that U.S. government now has, because probably if North Korea does not have any nuclear weapons or nuclear materials already produced, then they probably could have some kind of agreement that they did with Iran, because Iran has all the nuclear facilities which can lead to the production of nuclear weapons, but Iran has not made any nuclear weapons yet. So it might be easier for the United States could have made an agreement that rewards something in front to shut down those facilities and to check the compliance schedule of the Iran government. But however, the problem for North Korea is that they already made the nuclear weapons and the materials. So until we can be sure that we removed all the nuclear weapons, we have to hold some grips on North Korea. So that is the biggest difference from the Iran and the North Korean case.
It is similar and uniquely different at the same time. Let's go back to the scene at the hotel where the two leaders managed to make contact and sit down for talks and also address the press. We have some fresh footage. It's going to be played on tape delay, but let's take our time and soak in what has developed so far over in Hanoi. Let's take a look.
We meet here again in 260 days in Hanoi.
261 days since we last met. There have been some misunderstandings. There have been these ties from the roles to our misunderstanding situation. And there was hostility that still remained from the very, very past period, that from the outside. But however, we have been able to overcome all the obstacles, and here we are today, after 261 days.
And looking back at the time, I believe that we had gone a lot of thoughts, patience, and effort.
I believe that those 261 days were the days during which a lot of painstaking efforts were necessary, and also a lot of patience were needed.
And here we are today, and I hope that we can make great achievements that many people are longing for. And I will exert my full efforts.
And that gives us a hope that we will be successful this time, and I would really try to make that happen.
Thank you very much. That's really nice. Well, I wanted to say it's an honor to be with Chairman Kim. It's an honor to be together in really a country, Vietnam, where they've really rolled out the red carpet, and they're very honored to have us. And it's great to be with you. We had a very successful first summit. I felt it was very successful. And some people would like to see it go quicker. I'm satisfied, you're satisfied. We want to be happy with what we're doing. But I thought the first summit was a great success, and I think this one hopefully will be equal or greater than the first. And we made a lot of progress, and I think the biggest progress was our relationship is really a good one.
네, 대단히 감사합니다. 김정은 위원장님 다시 만나게 되어서 영광입니다. 그리고 또 오늘 같이 하게 되어서 또 매우 기쁩니다. 우리가 베트남에서 만났습니다. 베트남이 아주 우리를 굉장히 환영을 하고 레드카펫을 깐 것처럼 그렇게 환영하고 있습니다. 우리는 첫 번째 그 정상회담을 굉장히 성공적으로 마쳤습니다. 어떤 사람들은 우리의 어떤 진전이 더 빨리 갔으면 하고 그렇게 원하는 사람도 있지만 내가 보기에는 우리가 상당히 잘하고 있고 또 첫 번째 그 정상회담이 굉장히 성공적이었습니다. 이번 회담도 첫 번째 것과 같은 성공 또는 아니면 더 성공하기를 바라고 있습니다. 그리고 우리는 아마 이번에 더 많은 진전을 이룰 것 같습니다.
And as I've said many times, and I say it to the press, I say it to anybody that wants to listen, I think that your country has tremendous economic potential, unbelievable, unlimited. And I think that you will have a tremendous future with your country, a great leader. And I look forward to watching it happen and helping it to happen. And we will help it to happen.
우리 여러 번 제가 얘기를 했고 또 언론들한테도 제가 여러 번 했습니다만은 저는 조선이 엄청난 경제적인 잠재력을 가지고 있다라고 그렇게 생각합니다. 그리고 앞으로 큰 성공을 이룰 거로 생각합니다. 위대한 지도자 밑에서 아주 잘할 거로 생각합니다. 그리고 앞으로 그러한 성공을 저는 계속 보게 되기를 기대하고 있습니다.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate it. And we're going to go have dinner. And then we have some big meetings scheduled for tomorrow. And we'll see you, I guess, at a news conference at some point during the day. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, do you have any reaction to Mike Cohen of his testimony?
Okay, ending with all smiles and looking very much forward to the dinner. I wonder if Kim Jong-un needs an interpreter. I believe he is quite fluent in English, right, Chung-hee?
Yes, he grew up in a country, he grew up in, I know that he went to an international school and he actually had a lot of friends from a lot of different countries. He grew up in Sweden, as far as I know. So I know that he is very fluent in English. And, you know, when he took a short stroll with the US president last year, if they were to communicate with each other, then they could have spoken English with each other. So
I'm certain Donald Trump is not exactly fluent in Korean.
Yeah, so they could have, I'm thinking that they spoke in English. So Kim Jong-un could have communicated with Trump quite well in that session.
Right, and there are concerns about President Donald Trump not making a detailed approach to this summit. That's been raised before. What do you make of these concerns? Should people be less worried about President Trump making the same mistake as the last summit?
So there was that kind of concerns before the summit this time that that is why the U.S. government officials try to have the meaningful working level negotiations before they fix the date for the second summit. So once the date for the summit is fixed, there is no more incentive for North Korean government to fully commit to the working level negotiations because they know that working level negotiation is much tougher than dealing directly with President Trump because they had that kind of experience last year. So the working level negotiators last year had real hard time that there was not a meaningful progress in the negotiation even though they met 6 times at the Panmunjom and they met about like 14 or 20 hours in Singapore. However, they could not result in any meaningful outcome. So that the result is that the abstract agreement between two leaders. However, many things, we believe that so many things were discussed between two leaders. That is why at the news conference that even though it was not written in that joint agreement, that President Trump mentioned that he's going to suspend the military deals with South Korea. So which was not written in the paper and which was never believed to be discussed with his staff. So some things really can happen in the one-on-one meeting between Trump and Kim without having any kind of heads up to his staff or the foreign leaders, including President Moon Jae-in.
How much of an influence has the midterm election result have on President Trump's decision to proceed on with the summit and the date and the place it was set?
So I don't know, but on last year after the President Moon's summit with the Chairman Kim in September, right after it, the President Trump shows his interest to have the second summit with the Chairman Kim right away. So I think from that moment that the President Trump also sees some kind of opportunity that he's going to improve his standing in the U.S. domestic politics by having this kind of meeting with Chairman Kim again. However, there was no real progress made at the working level negotiators. That is why the U.S. government officials probably did not recommend President Trump to meet Chairman Kim right away. So the time has passed like 8 months, and then I think that's about the time that President Trump think enough is enough. So now he thinks that he might be the best negotiator compared to his staff. So that is why he said that he's going to have a meeting with Chairman Kim directly at the end of February.
Right. At this time, of course, there are expectations that's lowered somewhat because of the disappointments from the first summit. Compared to that first one, what key details do these two leaders hope to hammer out in this summit?
Well, it's actually to come up with some specific details of the 4 pillars that they agreed upon. So it was establishing new North Korea-U.S. relations, setting a peace regime, complete denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula, and also getting back the remains of the American soldiers from North Korea. So in terms of the first 3 pillars, there are a lot of things to be talked about, but in specifics, they will be, of course, exchanging liaison offices, which, according to CNN, is currently being discussed between North Korea and the U.S., though the news is actually not confirmed. And others, well, there are 4 things that North Korea told Stephen Biegun, U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, that it specifically wants. And they were sanctions relief, setting up liaison offices, resuming inter-Korean economic cooperation, such as Kaesong Industrial Complex and Mount Kumgangsan tours, as well as making a formal declaration to the end of the Korean War. So these things would actually fit into the 4 pillars that the leaders of Pyongyang and Washington agreed upon at their Singapore summit. So we are actually not sure how far Washington and Pyongyang will be able to go in terms of denuclearization, because there are so many things to be discussed. I mean, North Korea has mentioned that it'll dismantle its key sites, but there are matters of, verifications, having inspectors coming in, the experts, as well as North Korea providing its, list of arsenals and everything. We don't know how far they'll be able to go. But in terms of other things, in terms of, setting up liaison offices or making a declaration, these 2 issues could be comparatively lighter than in terms of denuclearization issues. So those are some of the things that will be hammered out between the 2 leaders. And actually, if I may ask a question to Dr. Wu, as I said, we don't know how far the 2 countries will be able to go in terms of denuclearization, but do you see matters like, setting up liaison offices, or matters like making an end-of-the-war declaration, could these things be included in the summit declaration that will come out tomorrow? What do you think?
So the priority was given to the denuclearization issue this time. However, Mr. Biegun mentioned that the purpose of having summit this time is to make a progress out of the agreements made in the Singapore summit, which is the 4 pillars that Jung just mentioned. So now the U.S. government are diversify the issues from the denuclearization to four agreements made in Singapore. So now if you make some kind of progress with regard to the bilateral relations or peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, or even repatriation of the remains of the U.S. soldiers, they still can claim that we made the progress this time. Even though there is very low-level progress in denuclearization, they still can argue that this summit is a huge success because we made this kind of progress. And Vietnam has very unique history with the United States, as we just talked that they fought against each other, and the biggest casualty for in the U.S. military history. And then before they re-established their diplomatic relations, there are kind of 2 demands by the U.S. government to the Vietnamese government. One is withdraw from the Cambodia, because Vietnam had a warfare with Cambodia. So U.S. government requests that Vietnam should withdraw from Cambodia. And the other is Vietnamese government should fully repatriate all the remains of the U.S. soldiers at the time. So the U.S. government, when this repatriation of the remains of the U.S. soldiers were included in the 4 elements last year, some people feel very strange, because the number 4 is very much different from the number 1 to 3 in terms of the scope of the agreement. So many people believe that because the agreement between 2 on number 1 to 3, the bilateral relations and the peace regime of the Korean Peninsula and the denuclearization is too abstract. That is why they include something concrete, repatriation of the remains. However, that issue is very important for the U.S. government. So if I may that, if I can make the analogy that Japanese government always talk about abduct issues. So Prime Minister Abe yesterday mentioned that at this summit that there should be some kind of discussion on the abduct issues and the denuclearization issues. So they put abduct issues in front of the denuclearization issue, which might not be like fully understandable by Korean observers. So I think that if they can make some kind of more progress, say that the North Korean government is going to fully cooperate with the U.S. government in terms of repatriate possibly all the remains of the U.S. soldiers, then President Trump is going to say about it. And if they are going to make some kind of progress at the exchange of inspection or verification of 풍계리 or 동창리, which were believed to be useless, no use anymore to the North Korean government. But I think that U.S. government can buy the horse second time, this time. So they can make that kind of progress in number 1 to 4, and even if they made less progress on the number 3.
Right. It's a very exciting time. We are looking forward to more developments coming from Vietnam. For now, as we heard from our reporters earlier, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump are having a social dinner, and they are also set to be joined by their top aides. Our Choi Si-young tells us more about that event.
After their one-on-one discussion later on Wednesday, the two leaders will have an intimate dinner, the first of its kind for Kim and Trump. Other than Kim and Trump themselves, two aides from each side are expected to be present at the dinner. Sitting next to Kim Jong-un will be North Korea's top nuclear negotiator Kim Young-chol and his foreign minister Lee Young-ho. Joining President Trump will be Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, along with acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. Watchers say since only the closest aides will take part in the greeting and dinner, the two countries will have a frank discussion on denuclearization and corresponding measures. Adding to that speculation is the fact that the hawkish U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton, who also arrived in Hanoi on Tuesday, isn't a member of this meeting. The two leaders are expected to wrap up the meeting with the Hanoi Declaration. The outcome of this meeting, experts say, will determine much of what the two-day summit will produce at the end. Choi Si-young, arirang News.
And it goes without saying that global news outlets have their eyes glued to the second Kim-Trump summit. Our Seo Bo-bin takes a look at what they think of the historic meeting.
U.S.-based media outlet Vox weighed in on what it thought a possible deal between Kim and Trump may look like. Citing sources familiar with the negotiations,
So before that, they're supposed to, according to the schedule, they were supposed to have a 20-minute long one-on-one conversation. So it seems like now they're into the social dinner, which means U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un spoke to each other one-on-one. So it seems like they've had maybe a good conversation, and now they're sitting down with their top officials for a social dinner.
They did talk to the media and then went on to hold a little heart-to-heart conversation. And now they're ready to sit down for a meal. What do you make of the position? They seem closer to each other than the previous session, right?
Yeah, so I think it's much more social than last year because it's like working luncheon and with like 7 to 8 staff accompanied. So I think that even though they described it as a social dinner, I think there is no way that they can avoid the subject of the denuclearization. So I think that, as I mentioned, that they are going to discuss and try to find what each other's position is at this stage. So Chairman Kim wants to find out whether President Trump has some room to be maneuvered to lift the sanctions. And President Trump might need to find out whether Chairman Kim is ready to give up something that President Trump can say that, oh, I got this. So I think two leaders are going to discuss that what can be exchanged, and maybe after that they are going to give instructions to their negotiators.
Right. It's an intimate but intense session for the two leaders, which is possibly one reason why they wanted the menu to be simple and easily digestible. And we apologize to our viewers for some of the technical difficulties we're experiencing. We were cut off from our feed from Hanoi to give you the details about what's going on during the sit-down between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump.
So if I may just jump in, we just got some pictures of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump sitting down for a social dinner. Just to give our viewers a recap, it's 7:11. It's about 7:12 actually in Hanoi right now, and they were supposed to start their social dinner at 7 o'clock in the evening. So they sit down. It's a 3-to-3 social dinner, which involves two top aides from each of Pyongyang and Washington. So from the North Korean side, accompanying Kim Jong-un are Kim Young-chol, the top nuclear negotiator who's heading the North Korean regime's United Front Department, who's involved in negotiations with the U.S. and South Korea, of course. And another one accompanying Kim Jong-un is Lee Yong-ho, who's the regime's foreign minister. From the Washington side, it'll be Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who's the direct counterpart for Kim Young-chol on the North Korean side, and Mick Mulvaney, who's the acting chief of staff from the White House. So it'll be a 1 hour and 30-minute long social dinner between the three figures from each of Pyongyang and Washington, and it seems like the dinner has started in Hanoi.
Right, Mick Mulvaney is the odd man nowadays, the unfamiliar face among the group that's been gathered. What do you make of this addition of Mick Mulvaney to the mix for this summit?
So the Mr. Kelly was included last year as a chief of staff to the president. So at that time, that there was no dinner, but there was a meeting with the President Trump. So there was Secretary Pompeo and NSC advisor John Bolton. And at the time, chief of staff Mr. Kelly was at the table with Chairman Kim Jong-un and Kim Young-chol, Lee Yong-ho, and Lee Soo-young, who's in the committee for the foreign affairs. So I think that the mix is understandable from the North Korea side, because Lee Yong-ho is actually the technical counterpart for the Secretary Pompeo, because Lee Yong-ho is representing the North Korean government in foreign affairs, but now the Kim Young-chol is actual counterpart for the negotiation for the denuclearization. So the two counterpart for the Secretary Pompeo is on the table tonight. But when Mr. Mulvaney was included, that there might be a chance that Chairman Kim's sister Kim Yo-jong might be included, because she is like acting chief of staff to the Chairman Kim, but she was not, and Lee Yong-ho was included. So it looks like that North Korea is more interested in talking the subject of the denuclearization than the U.S. side on the dinner. So I think U.S. wants to have more social dinner than the North Korea this time.
It's interesting because North Korea is, of course, has far greater expertise and experts gather around the table compared to the U.S. side.
That's right. I mean, North Korea, the top officials from North Korea's Foreign Affairs Ministry are the experts in terms of nuclear negotiations. I mean, we can't, at this point, we can't forget about North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee was actually the direct counterpart for U.S. nuclear envoy. So these top officials from the North Korean regime are all involved in their communications with South Korea, with the U.S. in terms of denuclearizing. So it's quite noteworthy how North Korean leader Kim Jong-un decided to bring both of his top nuclear aides to the social dinner tonight. And I think that actually happens because, you know, Kim Young-chol was the ex-spy agency chief, and that really connects to Mike Pompeo being the ex-spy chief. So Mike Pompeo being the direct counterpart for both of these people, we got to see what happens and what they talk about at their social dinner.
Well, we can find solace in the fact that the intel connection are both there. Let's go back to the scene. We are getting footage of the dinner that's being held for the two leaders over in Hanoi. Let's take a look.
Good time. You are. I hope so. One of the great photographers of the world.
Leaders and the translators.
Make us look very good. I'll work on that. One of the great photographers.
Well, we had a meeting for about 20 minutes before coming here. It was about 30 minutes, I guess. And for that time, our conversation was very interesting.
Boy, if you could have heard that dialogue, what you would pay for that dialogue, that was good. So we're going to have a very busy day tomorrow, and we'll probably have a pretty quick dinner. And a lot of things are going to be solved, I hope, and I think it'll lead to really a wonderful situation long term. And our relationship is a very special relationship.
오늘 그 만찬을 한 다음에 또 내일은 하루 종일 또 아주 진지하게 회담을 할 예정입니다. 우리는 굉장히 좋은 관계를 가지고 있고 아마 성공적인 회담으로 생각이 됩니다.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. See you tomorrow. Thank you.
Well, it's looking like a very lighter atmosphere compared to when they first sat down and the lights suddenly went off for some unexpected special event that we did not get a closer look at. Chung-hee?
Much lighter, and of course, much lighter when they first exchanged their greetings before the press. The two leaders actually seemed very tense, very rigid, but now it seems like they're relaxed, ready to have dinner, ready to have a good dinner. They're smiling, intimate smiles. So just to give our viewers a recap, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un says that he had a almost 30-minute long conversation with his counterpart, with his U.S. counterpart, and he said the conversation was, quote, very interesting. And the U.S. President Donald Trump says a lot of things will be solved tonight, if I heard that correctly. And he said he hopes that what happens tonight will lead to some wonderful situations and some great results to come after the summit tomorrow. So there I was able to spot the two leaders plus their translators, as well as the two top aides from Pyongyang and Washington, the foreign minister and the head of the United Front Department from the North Korean side, as well as the Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff from the White House, and the State Secretary Mike Pompeo.
Right, it's quite a change in tone from President Donald Trump. Initially, before the summit, he tried to lower expectations, saying, we'll see, and this is just one of many more summits to come. How do you read the changes in attitude from President Donald Trump saying there's going to be something incredible tomorrow? So from last year's experience, that President Trump always said something big, that he's going to achieve something nice, and he always mentioned that his relationship with the chairman Kim Jong-un is the key to make an achievement this time. So we don't know yet what is going on between two countries in terms of the negotiations so far. However, President Trump mentioned that there is all false reportings so far with regard to what can be achieved this time in Hanoi. So I think he's again attacking the media for the false reporting for him, and then I think that he's going to say he made a successful summit this time, regardless what kind of outcome that he's going to have this time. So what kind of criteria that we are going to have is the key to evaluate the summit this time. But for President Trump, any progress from the last year's summit would be evaluated as a success this time. A very low bar. Yes. And we talked a little bit about setting up a liaison office for the two sides. For the two Koreas, it's not that difficult because it's just over the border, or they can set something on the border. But for the U.S., of course, this is going to be, it could be a tedious process, right?
So it's not going to be an easy job for the two governments to set up the liaison office in the capital of each country. However, there was an agreement between the U.S. and North Korea in the past that they would exchange the liaison office. So since there's a template from the past that it's not going to be that difficult. However, when U.S. government promised to have a liaison office in the past, that North Korea promised to dismantle Yongbyon, and they actually promised that they are going to remove all the existing nuclear weapons and materials and going back to NPT and going back under the IAEA safeguards. So to reach that point, that U.S. provided something in front. So now, without having that kind of promise made by North Korea, that it would be much more difficult for President Trump to justify promising liaison office to North Korea in U.S. domestic politics. So unless North Korea is providing more than Punggye-ri and Dongchang-ri, it might be difficult for President Trump to have liaison office in Pyongyang and Washington.
All right, it's not going to be a simple process, but it will be worth it if that happens. Now let's go back to Hanoi, where our Park Hee-jun is standing by at the International Media Center. Hee-jun, what's the response like there over there after the two sides finally made contact?
Well, Daniel, everyone here, all of their eyes were glued to that large screen behind me when it was showing us footage of President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Now, we saw them have handshakes, exchange a couple of remarks, and smile, and it was enough to get us a reaction. Now, a lot of smartphones were out, and we also heard a lot of typing because everyone was trying to get down what the two leaders were trying to say. And maybe it's because we already saw some of the similar scenes last year in Singapore, but there wasn't as enough buzz compared to last year. I spoke to several reporters who were here with me watching the scenes, and they told me that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and his President Trump seemed like they had a better relationship compared to last year. And after all, Trump did say that their biggest progress is their relationship, and evidently they had more smiles on their faces compared to their previous June's summits. Now, everyone here is busy filing the reports on what they just saw. I actually wanted some of them live on air with me, but here I am alone with you, and everyone's way too preoccupied for me to disturb them. They're trying to make their deadlines and all. But I'll continue to stay here at the Media Center to bring you the latest on the atmosphere of the Media Center. Daniel?
Just as you are, they're wrapped up in their own little schedule, and they're busy keeping their folks at home updated. Thank you for the updates, Hee-jun. We appreciate it. Now back here in the studio with our Professor Woo Jung-yup and our reporter Oh Jung-hee. We have been continuing our talks about the possible outcomes, the potential positive outcomes from the summit, about the liaison office, and of course that would mean greater access to the Hermit Kingdom.
That's right. I mean, it's really from the U.S. side, actually, what we got to note is another thing is humanitarian assistance, right? In terms of providing humanitarian assistance, the U.S. is now trying to ease its standards and allow more items to be brought into North Korea. But another thing we got to note is that it's reviewing its travel exemptions on the American people, American humanitarian aid workers who want to actually travel to the regime to, provide the necessary items. So in that front, maybe we could exchange more, not exactly people-to-people exchanges, but more Americans actually traveling to the regime. And plus, in addition to that, we could expect, if not much is to be achieved on the denuclearization front, we could expect not only liaison offices or formal end-of-the-war declaration, but also some cultural or people-to-people exchanges to begin. And that's, according to an expert that I spoke to before, he said, well, people-to-people exchanges or cultural exchanges could be a good starting point for the U.S. and North Korea to sort of improve their relations and start moving forward to form better relationship than before. So those are some things that we should, look at.
Right, but the concerns stemming from this progression would be that the North Korean regime is known to use many possible options as leverage, as a means to control its populace. So even if they open up, how much could they open up to let their people know about the outside world?
So now the problem is that even if U.S. government is willing to provide some kind of people-to-people exchange to North Korea, that it is unclear whether North Korea is happy to accept it. So in the past, when U.S. Agrees to have liaison office, it is actually North Korea that is not really happy about that outcome, because North Korean government is not happy to see that there's a car with a U.S. flag in Pyongyang, even though they still believe that U.S. is their enemy. So I think that even if U.S. government is providing that kind of measures, like diplomatic measures and the people-to-people exchanges, we don't know yet how much North Korea is going to appreciate it. And for that, to that point, that one thing that we have to remember is that the U.S. government has this travel ban of its own people to North Korea, not because of the WMD program of North Korea. So now, to make some progress in WMD front, then the United States government is thinking of relieving their restrictions on their own citizens' travel to North Korea. But the reason why U.S. government put that restriction is because of the human rights issues after the Mr. Otto Warmbier case. So now the reason to relieve the restriction on the people-to-people exchange or travel ban should be about there's some kind of improvement in the human rights conditions in North Korea. That is how U.S. government, the executive branch, can persuade that the legislative branch that now we are ready to relieve some kind of ban on the travel because we observe some kind of human rights conditions improvement in North Korea. But if U.S. government is going to say that, oh, we are going to provide this to achieve some kind of goals in the WMD front, then it's going to be politically controversial within the U.S. domestic politics.
And in terms of the animosity or aggressive rhetoric against the U.S., it has certainly changed from North Korea, right, over the recent months and years?
That's true. Well, we of course have to note that North Korea and the United States exchanged some aggressive rhetoric towards each other it was 2017 when President Trump said fire and fury, and it was, the leaders showing off their nuclear buttons on their desks and their colorful adjectives at the same time. Of course, but recently North Korea, from its state media, has been having very restrained reporting on the United States itself, and they have actually released some statements towards the United States on their nuclear negotiations. Pyongyang has expressed quite a lot of times that it's not really satisfied with what's going on, but I really couldn't see aggressive rhetoric from those statements unlike before. And I could see that the North Korean side was trying to be very polite.
Trying very hard.
Trying very hard. And it was trying to, keep it going instead of stopping everything. So in the past, North Korea would be like, okay, we're not going with this anymore. We're not doing this anymore. We're not talking to you anymore. But now North Korea would be like, we know that President Trump is willing to talk with us, so let's get this going. We want more from you. And that's sort of the message that we've been able to see from the North Korean state media. A lot of things have changed.
Right, but this change, Dr. Wu, coming from North Korea, how would it affect the people who've grown accustomed to looking at the U.S. as their main enemy?
So from the propaganda point in North Korea, that it is very difficult to suddenly change the tone to its own people that we have developed these nuclear weapons and we have suffered because of the United States, and we need to, because of the United States, we have to develop the nuclear weapons. Now we have to change, because now we have these friendly relations with the United States, and so that is why we don't need the nuclear weapons anymore. But unless U.S. agrees to relieve sanctions, there's no real tangible things can be felt by the ordinary people in North Korea. That means that, so what is this? Government says that we now have different and new relations with the United States, but there's no change in my life. So it's going to be a pressure for the North Korean government if they suddenly change the tone without having any tangible outcome with regard to its economy.
It is difficult to keep the lids on and keep the outside world on the outside, especially when they need to open up to allow inspectors to verify whether there's progress in human rights or denuclearization or economic efforts.
So now the problem is that there are so many different barriers to lift the sanctions with regard to the North Korea's nuclear weapons. So it's not only United Nations sanctions, but also there are laws, executive orders by United States government. So now the report is that even if State Department is agreeing to provide something to the North Korea, that maybe Treasury Department says different things. So now the problem is that the U.S. government is willing to provide something, but the internal discussions would make different outcomes that what can be provided to North Korea at this stage. So it is very complicated.
In terms of interactions for economic cooperation with South Korea, there were some issues, I believe, in terms of the North Korean government's or the North Korean regime's control over the people working for the South Korean side. That has been an issue. Could that be changed in the near future if we were to resume inter-Korean cooperation in that way?
So now the Inter-Korean Economic Cooperation Project has more attention because President Moon mentioned when he had a phone call with President Trump. But the thing is that for the Inter-Korean Economic Cooperation Project to begin, there are a lot of things has to be done from the U.S. government. So without relieving sanctions or easing sanctions or without making special cases to the Inter-Korean Economic Project, there is literally no way that our government can proceed with the Economic Cooperation Project. So I think that North Korean government in Kim Jong-un's New Year's address shows interest that without any preconditions, they want to resume that Kaesong Industrial Complex and the Kumgang Mountain tourism. But it's going to be a tough process to have the permission from the international community on those projects.
So it could be like if the U.S., what North Korea wants is sanctions relief. It wants the U.S. to lift its sanctions. But that may not be able to happen if some critical steps are not made at this Hanoi summit right here. So if that's not possible to happen, then many think that maybe the U.S. may be able to offer sanctions waivers in more fields to enable at least inter-Korean economic cooperation. So South Korean President Moon has told the U.S. president that he is willing to take the role of forging, economic ties with North Korea if that lessens the U.S. burden. And South Korea's some top officials from the government also say that those projects not only include the Kaesong Industrial Complex and the South Korean tours to the Mount Kumgangsan, but as well as the road and railway network projects, because the two Koreas have actually done something on those fronts, and it's actually easier for them to take off instead of Washington and Pyongyang coming up with some new projects and coming up with some new sanctions waivers. So that's actually an area where the three parties, the two Koreas and the United States, could actually start off.
We talk about cooperation between the two Koreas. We can't leave out the changes that has been made and that could be made in the future in terms of military tension easing, right?
That's true. Well, South Korea and North Korea have worked to remove their guard post on the demilitarized zone. They've also connected a road crossing through the inter-Korean border. We've seen a lot of measures we've seen a lot of measures being taken on that military front. I mean, there were two agreements signed at the September summit last year. One was the General Summit Agreement, but the other one was the military agreement, which the South Korean government calls as a de facto end-of-war declaration. So in that front, and not in terms of the economy or culture or whatnot, out of all these fields, the field that we were able to see the most progress was the military front. They actually achieved in lowering the military tension on the Korean Peninsula. So we definitely eyes are on what will happen in the future in that front as well. And another thing that we should look to is Kim Jong-un's return visit to South Korea as well. That was actually being discussed. A lot of attention was on whether that'll happen last year, but it actually didn't happen because there were just too much burden for the North Korean leader to come down to the South. But, you know, if this summit between North Korea and the U.S. turns out to be successful, and if there are many reasons for the North Korean leader to come down to South Korea to make progress on their inter-Korean economic cooperation, if they have so much to discuss, then maybe the return visit could happen too.
Well, from the inside looking out in terms of easing military tensions and the improving ties with North Korea, it might be difficult for some South Koreans to accept these rapid changes.
So the reason for that is because there is no real change from North Korean side with regard to its military. So there's no meaningful steps taken by North Korea with regard to its nuclear weapons, and there's no sign that North Korea decrease its military readiness, which has like biggest armies in the world, right? So without having that kind of things, that South Korean government, they believe that South Korean government unilaterally remove the guard against North Korea. That is the core of the criticism from some factions within South Korea. So now, even though we have like comprehensive military agreement in the September last year, so many things should be determined at the Joint Military Committee, which was described in the comprehensive military agreement. However, even though there are so many improving outcomes that resulted in from that agreement, we two Koreas have not reached an agreement how to establish that joint military committee to determine so many details described in the comprehensive military agreement. So if some progress is made at the summit this time, that maybe North Korea is willing to engage again with South Korea to make a development on those sides. So in the fall last year, that North Korea promised to exchange some kind of like cultural performances, but it didn't happen. So I think that North Korea is very much observed by their talks with the United States at stage. So there should be some kind of progress for North Korea to have some room to think about these kind of issues with South Korea.
Well, in terms of approaching North Korea and dealing with North Korea, it seems like the more aggressive stance you take towards them, they would respond in the same manner as the U.S. has witnessed with their stealth bomber flights and North Korea responding with nuclear testings and missile testings, right?
That's right, and that is actually why the chemistry between President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is actually very great, because President Moon Jae-in is always very friendly to the North Korean leader. He's really proactive, and he's very he's willing to talk with the North Korean leader, and he's willing to engage with the North Korean leader to make some progress and some results in terms of improving the inter-Korean ties. I mean, we've had three inter-Korean summits last year, 2 planned, 1 not. Through the 2 summits, they came up with a lot of, joint schedules, joint plans, and one that was not planned ahead was to push forward with the negotiations between North Korea and the U.S. to enable a summit between the 2 sides. So, yeah, and the leaders of the 2 Koreas came up with a lot of agreements. Those are currently in the stage of being carried out. But actually, like listening to Dr. Wu, I actually have one question I want to ask. you talked about the autumn cultural performance to be held in Seoul. Actually, the South Korean artists made their way up to Pyongyang to perform before the North Korean citizens. That was expected to happen last fall, but that didn't happen. And this time, at the September summit, how Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in agreed to celebrate together the March 1st
independence movement.
Right, independence movement, but that is not going to happen. So what do you think about these? It seems like they have a lot of grand plans to, carry out together, but somehow it ends up not happening.
So when we had this family reunion in the past, that we sometimes criticized North Korea for not not cooperating fully with the South Korean government, because it's always very difficult for the North Korean government to search for the families party during the wartime period, But a couple of years later, we found that North Korea's administrative capacity is very much limited because they are not like normal country like us. So their government apparatus, their capacity is very much limited. So now from the 2018 January, North Korea started to have so many things. So now they are going to have a talk with the United States. They have talks at the military. They talks at the cultural level. So they have so many things which they have never experienced before. So whether they are going to have they are going to jointly celebrate that March 1st Independence Day with South Korea, there should be some kind of preparations a long time before the March 1st. But with all the upcoming talks with the United States and the visiting by Kim Young-chul to Washington, D.C. in January, so all those things should be taking all the time for the leadership in North Korea. So that is why it might be administratively very difficult for North Korea. At the same time, they might not have that kind of enthusiasm at this stage because they have not gotten any tangible result out of this diplomatic move from last year.
From this very hotly anticipated summit, how would you rate somewhat of a win or a loss for either sides coming out? They can't both. Ideally, it will be a win-win scenario, but that can't always be the case, right?
So we don't know yet because what kind of paper they are going to sign tomorrow. So if we can see some kind of positive progress from the Singapore summit last year, and this is not the end process. So I think we can evaluate tomorrow that if there's going to be another process promised by North Korean leader with regard to denuclearization, I think we said that it's successful.
Okay, we will keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best. And we did witness the new game face of Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, so we will expect something good out of today's meeting and tomorrow's summit as well.